The Curves tool may be the most powerful color correction tool in Fusion, and today I want to show you how I can use it in some basic compositing tasks. It is a very flexible tool and it's actually quite easy to master if you haven't used it so far. I will do a quick review on how it works, how you do basic color corrections in the Curves tool that you might also do in other tools, and then I head into my compositing examples and show you how I do the foreground-background integration with some simple color corrections in Curves. Okay, so let's jump in. Let me bring in the Curves tool from right here and see what I'm getting into my flow. Let me shift, put it in. So now it's in the flow, and you see here different channels and a curve underneath. This curve actually, mathematically speaking, it's a function graph even, which just does nothing. If I pull here and do changes, then my input values, for example here 2.5 gets now mapped to a value of 2.6. So that's the output value here. Let me undo this. So that's how this Curves tool works. It's called Curves, or sometimes people refer to it as a lookup table. That comes more like from color grading terminology. And the name lookup table, if I look at this, I see a graph, right? Why do you call it table? And the reason for that is if you think about back at like discrete 8-bit images, you could, instead of having values from 0 to 1, you can imagine having values from 0 to 255 for your 8-bit color range. And then you could actually take each individual value and write it into a table right where it gets mapped to. So for example, value 96 gets mapped to value 123. You could write that like in a table, and this may be how it could be stored internally for computational purposes. So that's where the name lookup table comes from. Now here I'm not really thinking of a table, because actually I'm manipulating a graph. I even have these spline handles, so I can make curves like this, which are like not value by value, but which are defined by these points on the end and by these angles here, and they can then work also on different bit depths. So I'm working on float 16 or float 32 or so. So this table idea right now is maybe not that fitting anymore, but just for terminology, that's what people refer to it sometimes. Let me now start with some basic color corrections that I might also do, for example, in a brightness and contrast node. And I can actually do this by comparison directly. Let me bring in a brightness and contrast, put it here into the left viewer and my Curves view into the right viewer. And now in the brightness contrast we have gain, lift, gamma. So let me see if I, for example, if I take the lift and bring it up or down, see what happens, right? Let me bring the lift up to 0.25. If I am in the Curves tool, the lift means actually bringing up the left point. Again, alpha disabled, and now I bring this up. And if you want, you can constrain it by pressing the Shift key. So now I'm bringing it up on one line. So if I bring this up to 0.25, roughly, I'm getting the exact same image. Actually, I can enter it if you want to be really precise. You can enter numbers here as well. So I have my out point up, so the black values from value 0 get lifted up to 0.25. People often say lift is like increasing the shadows, gain is decreasing the highlights. However, if you look at the curve, you see that actually all values in the image get affected up to the white point here at 1, 1. So here I have white, right, 1, 1. Here I have black, 0, 0. And actually all values get impacted by a lift operation. Just keep that in mind. Of course, the darkest one gets impacted most, the brightest one gets impacted least, but all values up to the white point get impacted. Let me bring that down again, and I'll just enter 0. And let's see if I do a gain. Let's bring the gain down, for example, make it a bit darker. And I can do the same in my curves and just press the Shift key to constrain it and bring this down. So these would be lift and gain operations in the curves view. Again, also again impacts all values except the black point in this case. If you bring the lift up, you could bring it like this, or I can control mouse wheel, zoom out, bring it down like this. This doesn't matter, right? If I do this or if I do this, it's the same output. If I do this, you see that here I have parts of the graph negative and I have negative values, so this could lead to negative output values. Let me now bring this into both viewers and change here to a waveform viewer, and you see here I have negative values here, right? So if I don't want this, let me bring this back to 0. If I don't want this, I can add an additional point and pull this one down to 0, like this, and can now move this point left and right. And what I have done now, effectively, I'm doing a lift. I'm reducing the lift with a clip black. So in the brightness and contrast, you would say clip black and then say, reduce the lift like this. It's not in the viewer right now. Now it is. So I can reduce the lift like this and clip the black values. And let me remove this brightness and contrast now. I stick to the curves from here on. Back to the curves, so I can do this again to bring down the lift. The same with the brightness. So if you want to clip up here, if I do this, I might get out of range values above 1 here. If I do want to clip this, let me undo this. I bring in an additional point, set it up to 1, and now I have can reduce the gain while clipping as soon as, here my image gets, you see visually it gets now clipped at 1 and clipped at 0, if that's what you want. Of course, usually you try to avoid this in almost all cases. But that's how the curves work. This editor here, you have to press the control key to zoom and control key also to drag with the mouse wheel and third mouse button. If you find this annoying here and too small, then you click on the spline view, and here for my selected curves tool, I can bring that into the viewer. Typically, I would go here and say show only selected tools. So otherwise, you see also potentially other animations if you have any, but normally just show only selected tools, select the curves tool, then you only have the curves tool. Sorry, let me select it again. And I select everything except for the alpha channel. If you don't want to see it, you can turn it off completely. So this is, you are able to change things like this. Then you see it, but are not able to change, and then you don't see it. So this is the spline editor. This button is super helpful, zoom to fit. This just brings this box here, the whole size of the curve into the viewer. And then you can move around like in other viewers, and you can zoom and so on. Now I have here these spline handles. What can I do with them? So let me go back to my default. Up. Few more undos until I have this. I have my default curve. And now I am using these spline handles and I'm building an S-curve like this. Let me do something like this. What am I doing right now? So if you think about it, I am reducing the dark areas and increasing the bright areas, keeping the midpoint at the point where it always is. And this is actually an increase in contrast. So this is a contrast curve. That's what the contrast brightness and contrast tool does if you change the contrast. And here I can very gradually adjust it, right? So for example, I can say I want my dark tones much more, bring them down even further, right? And perhaps I want to bring my bright points not that far down or more or something like this. I could even add an additional point in the middle and adjust the middle point for my brightness and contrast. So this way I have very good control over this and can make a very smooth and gradual adjustment. So this would be increasing the contrast. You can probably imagine what decreasing contrast means. So just the opposite, right? Increasing the dark points, decreasing the bright points, and then I have an S-curve like this, and I'm decreasing the contrast. There are a few things on this curve which make using it easier. So for example, here you have these buttons here. You can do linear or press Shift L. You can make things smooth, Shift S. If I add another point, I don't want like steps like this, I can make them smooth by just pressing this point. There's also flatten. So if I wanted to do this lift here quickly, I could press the F key for flatten, and it flattens the tangent handle on this point. And now I'm having a lift with a clip, and it gradually, smoothly goes in and then goes into this curve. Right? So this is how I can manipulate these splines here. So we had lift, gamma, and lift, gain, and contrast. A gamma operation would be if I select a point in the middle and bring this up and down. And now I definitely want to smoothen this, Shift S or this button. So this would be similar to a gamma operation. Gamma increase, gamma decrease, right? So something like this. And again, I can make these handles longer, for example, to have more like global impact, or shorter, and so on, and gradually adjust this, smooth these maybe again, right? If I smooth them, then they adjust to the curve. Now I have like a kind of a gamma curve, where I can get pretty close to that. Okay, so much for the basic operation. You may have seen it in Photoshop or in the color page or in other places. So this is how the curves tool works in pretty much any software which has it. And now let's do some compositing with it. Let me start by compositing this airplane into the image, and I have already merged it together. Obviously the plane should probably fly a bit higher in the sky, but just for the color correction I keep it here, and later we can scale it anywhere we want. And my reference for this airplane is of course the sky. The original airplane sky is like super dark saturated blue, and this is the original lighting situation. And now in the scene here, I am having a like more muted colors. And then if I look at the distant areas of the image, those are probably the good reference. So if I want to look at white colors, I might compare it with the white clouds here for the highlights. And for the shadows and the really dark points, I might see, are there any really dark areas here? Perhaps these darker shadows, although that's probably not completely black. But I might look into the areas further away. I will probably not look like into this area, because the airplane is not like flying here, it's flying up in the sky. So the distant parts of the image may be a good reference. Now I may not really have a real black in the distant areas, and I can argue whether or not the airplane should be darker than those areas, like here these dark spots of the turbine. But I could start by matching it there, and then it's your judgment to say how far you go. Let me bring in the curves tool into the flow, and I will not work on the alpha channel. And because I have transparency, you'll see in a second, I have to click this checkbox. So let me start with the dark values. And if I want to do this like scientifically accurate, I could even compare values. So I can turn on my sub view here, and I have here the inspector view. If you see a different view, right click on it, and you see here the different options. You can look at waveforms in the sub view. Now sometimes it's too small, and you should better look at it in the main view, but just for the color inspector, this is fine. So if I look here at the values, like in the darkest values here, which are in the turbine, you see it's like 0.0 something, so it's close to absolute zero. On the other hand, if I look here in some, let's see, the darkest areas I can find here in the far background, let's say somehow these areas. Okay, so here especially my green and blue values are higher. So especially blue is like 0.18, 0.2, 19, something like this, and green is like 0.1, and red 0.05. So green is 2 times red, and blue roughly 2 times green, something like this, and here 0.00. So okay, so you have hardly any red. Now maybe this should be a bit darker, but now if you want to accurately adjust this, I could say I go into blue, and blue, which is practically 0 here, I want to bring to 0.18, 0.215 maybe. So the values, you know, were changing between 1.9, 2.0. So maybe something slightly lower is a good fit. And you see, I'm changing my whole image. I'm actually adding blue everywhere. That's because I didn't click this checkbox. If I click this, I'm only working on the area which has actually pixel values. The transparent areas should again be multiplied by the alpha channel, so that I'm not doing color correction on the transparent areas. Okay, so now I'm bringing up the blue values. The green values were roughly half of the blue values in the shadows back here. So maybe I can do something like 0.07. And this should be now pretty close to what I had here. Maybe the red values also like a tiny little bit, 0 to 0.03 or so, I don't know, just a tiny little bit. And now, of course, I'm changing the values everywhere, but now these values here, if you check, should be pretty close to like the darkest area that I'm checking here. And again, these might be, I stayed a bit lower than the 0.2 in blue intentionally, because this is like more brownish mixed pixels, and here I'm going a bit darker. Let's look at the brightest pixel values, and again, you can do it mathematically accurate, or you can do it by eye. So here I have 0.92 something, 0.88, 0.83. So let's start in blue. If I look at the clouds here, you have blue is almost, yeah, it's practically 1. So what I might do is I might set the white point from the highest pixel values here, which is in the blue channel around 0.93, 94, 95. I might go into that channel to start with and might set the white point to 1 for these values. If you like, bring in again the curves. So sometimes that's easier. And blue only, alpha I don't even want to see. So blue values, and now I can set it like the other way around. I can say for the blue values of like the highest values here, which were let's say 0.994, I want to set this one to absolute white. So I can go like this. Same in red, and there I might not go that far. Let's see what's the red value here. Okay, it's 0.93, and green 0.97, something like this. So what do we have here? 90. I can also just manually do this and maybe take the blue now as reference and bring a red point like just a little bit up like this to 1, and the green point maybe from here to 1, and just keep that relationship between red, green, and blue that you may find in the white pixels, or visually compare. Although sometimes if you want to be very accurate, this visual comparison can be a bit tricky. So if you do have a reference, you can actually manually compare if you like, right? Now you can also use the picker here to find values. Let's do that somewhere in the mid-range, or let's do that for the blue tone of the sky. Let me disconnect this for a second. So you see this is like a more saturated, it's like slightly different blue than this one. Now I don't need to match this exactly, because at the end I'm not color grading the sky, but actually the airplane. But still, just for reference and to understand the lighting situation outside, let me sample this. And sorry, I should have, let me select all the curves, bring it into the viewer, red, green, blue here as well. And now sample 1 point. And you see now the blue, green, and red sample points here. which I sampled for this sky. So you see this blue is almost 1, and here red is close to 0, green is somewhere in the middle. And I can compare these points with a point here. So if I now look at the inspector here, red 0.13. So here I have, what did I sample here? Let me select this one and make this larger so I can see it. So here I have red 0.1, so here the red value is slightly higher. If I want, I could directly match this up, even for these points. Here for green I have around 0.4, yeah, 0.39, 0.4. Here I sampled 0.32, so that would be a bit higher in the background. So I'm kind of matching like one area of the image now, right? And here blue, okay, that's close to what we sampled before, so I might just ignore this. I will probably smoothen this a bit with this button or Shift S. Same here, you know, that the impact is not too large. Now this doesn't match it exactly here, and that's not the point. I just, you know, try to match one sample point a bit. All in all, you may also notice that it's a bit more saturated. So I might do a desaturation. If I want to do this with color curves, I would just add a second one, change the space here to HLS and go into the saturation. And then maybe just bring this down. And again, I could bring it down in different areas, but perhaps just an overall slight desaturation. You could now say, okay, desaturate more in the strongest or in the weakest areas of the saturation, but you know, just bringing it down a little bit. Let me connect it again to see now how well this sits in the scene. So I'm looking at this overall. I think that the dark points are right, but overall perhaps these shadows, okay, so maybe you want to bring them up a little bit. If I want to do again some overall changes, I could again add another curves tool and just change all RGB values again, or go in here, do something to the lightness. So if I want to just change the lightness overall, keep my RGB adjustments relative to each other in shape, but now let's say I want to do a slight kind of gamma correction, maybe in the lower areas. Actually, let me sample this. Let me sample here. Where am I? Yeah, so I'm pretty low here. So maybe I go into this area and, you know, decide to lift it up just tiny little bit. So I can make these kind of adjustments very selectively, smoothen them out and really position them. So if I see it now like this, let me compare before after. If I disable them, Control P. So this was without any color correction. This is how it looks like now. I should probably see how it looks like if I also scale it down a bit. So it's probably flying somewhere up here. Now that's where I'm looking for the integration. And again, before, after, before, after. You see, I think I'm getting it in pretty well. You may be wondering, is this really the fastest way to get there? Of course, you can. Many of the adjustments I did now, you can do with other tools as well, perhaps even faster. There are even tools that can sample black points, sample white points, and so on, and that can be quite helpful. However, the curves tool can really do any form of fine adjustments, and in most cases, yes, you can maybe sample a black point or sample a white point, but in most cases there's like this kind of judgment call where you say, okay, no, this shouldn't be really exactly black, or it should be a bit more towards this tone, or it should be a bit more desaturated, and so on. And with the curves tools, you can really do any possible color change that is really, you can do anything that is possible in color space, right? And you can see immediately how the different colors relate to each other and in which area you did changes to which color and so on. You can see it all in one place, which can be really beneficial. This was a relatively simple and, let's say, natural example. Next, I want to go to a more, let's say, artistic view with very strong colors. Let's see how that goes. Second example, let me try this hot air balloon here and composite this over this colorful ocean picture. Now, balloon is probably much better than airplane from a social distancing perspective these days. Although I don't think it's a good idea to do a balloon ride over the ocean, is it? Anyhow, let's stick to the compositing part of things. So I have merged it again over my background image. So this was the original balloon image, different lighting situation, very different in this case. And now I'm putting it over this beautiful sunset picture here. And I want to handle this a bit differently. So let me directly bring in the curves tool and this time look at the histogram, not histogram, waveform. Let me look at the waveform. And if I do now changes in the curves tool, let me disable the alpha, enable pre-divide post multiply, and let me directly open it in the spline view. But I select all the 3 curves at once. And now if you see here, you can see pretty well that the balloon is like this area of the waveform, right? It's pretty easy to see. So I can also pretty easily see if my black and white points fit into the overall image, and especially like into the left part of this image. So I'm not like in front of the sun, right? But if I orient myself here on the left area and the shadows, I can see pretty well if this fits in the waveform. So first I can bring in my black points here, and oh, it seems like I don't have to do anything on the black points. So let me keep that at 0, 0. That seems to fit pretty well. And now here, at least compared to the ocean and the darker clouds here, my balloon here is much brighter here. So let me take it overall from the white points and bring this down. Let me just bring it directly down like into the area of the range that I have here on the left side of the image. Again, I'm not looking at this because this is like the sun itself, so I'm looking more at the sky and background here on this side of the image. So I might actually bring it down this far. And now I should take care of the overall tone and of the sunlight coming from one side, right? And I will do this with separate color curves. Let me bring in the next one. Again, this I could have done with the brightness and contrast as well, but now I'm using this one and separately trying to give this red tone here onto the balloon. So let me go to red, and again, you can work here or in the spline editor and just bring the reddish tone up so that it looks like really lit by the red afterglow here. So I might really bring this up. And this is not 100% red, like, so there's more a bit of orange, so meaning I should probably bring in a bit of green as well. Shift S to smoothen the curve. And now it's really your judgment how much it should be and how it looks like. But this is not the only thing. Now you can maybe fine-tune this further and decide how strong it should be. So this is like a gamma correction in the red tones, right? If I want, I can also do this on the highlights. Bring this even a bit further up. Again, I should probably use this so that I can easily select the points individually without the alpha. Let me just work on red for now, but see the other 2 curves. So this, maybe bring this up a bit. And you see in the waveform, in case you're blowing anything out, but I'm far away from that. So I can do these kind of changes here. But now I definitely want to distinguish between the area of the balloon that is like directly hit by the white afterglow here, so this area, and the darker areas like on the back side. So I will create a mask for this, and a simple polygon mask should do. Let me bring in a polygon mask. Let me start here. So I'll just go more or less through the middle. Well, actually I might, well, this area is super dark anyways. So let me go through the balloon, and well, there's some lonely guy here. And then this is all from the back side. So the inside of the balloon is part of the back side. So I can keep that separately. And I might accelerate this a little bit, but then outside I have everything masked off anyway, so I just need to get this line here correctly. So this Shift L linear, this one smooth, Shift S to smoothen it. So I'm trying to follow the shape of the balloon a bit here, and that's maybe too much. No. And I have to see how soft this mask should be. Let me bring it into the viewer. So I can do some general softness, but have to pay attention that I'm not too soft down here. So let me bring a bit of a soft edge, and let me also attach it to the color corrector. So we see already some effect. This is too much. So I'll just soften it a bit to get this edge here right, and just tiny little bit. You see, have to look carefully in the left viewer to see how soft it can get. So that's just a little bit to kind of get this round edge. Here it shouldn't really be too soft, but since it's very dark, it's not visible. And here maybe I want it softer than it is. So I will go for a double polyline here, and now go into the second tab key, into the second polyline, and soften this out a bit, bring this out a bit, so that there's a smoother transition across the rounded shape. Maybe bring it further in, something like this. Now I have my mask. I have attached it to my color corrector, which takes care of the reddish tone. And if I want the other side a bit more bluish, I can hook up another one, take the mask again. I use the same mask, connect to the next color curves, and this time here in the inspector I can use Apply Mask Inverted, and now go a bit towards the darker areas here, towards this dark blue. So perhaps I go into the red and green curve and bring them down a bit, and maybe the green even a bit more than the red, something like this. Oops. And then again, your judgment, how far you bring this and how tense this should be, and maybe even bring the highlights a bit down in all channels perhaps. And I might even bring this further towards the dark areas. So Shift S to smoothen it. And this way I have my final composite. How does it look like at the end? Let me select all the color tools, Control P to pass through, turn them on off. So this was before and this is now, and I hope you agree that fits into the scene much better. And now I can let the balloon fly off into the ocean. Alright, this was my basic compositing example with the Curves tool. Let me know if you need more about this, about other color tools in Fusion. There's of course a lot more to explore. Yeah, let me know, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up and that bell and that subscribe button if you aren't subscribed yet, and see you next time. My name is Bernd. Thanks for watching.